started. So welcome to tonight's class, which we titled Faith and Trust in God, but in which my goal is to leave you with a particular lesson. That lesson is as follows. First of all, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me properly. Awesome, perfect. Thumbs up, perfect. Thanks, guys. So my goal is to leave you as follows. I taught this lesson about 6 weeks ago at the second lesson of this past JLI course. And at that point, it was titled Discovering One. And the goal was to talk about monotheism and how monotheism was a gift to the world. But my goal with today's lesson is really to leave you guys with a powerful insight, and that is as follows. Belief in God does not just have to be something that is ritualistic, something that is faith-based, something that is connected to our religion, let's say, per se. In other words, and we'll see more about this in just a moment in the opening exercise of the class. But if you'll give me just a moment. Yes. Okay.
Everybody say hello to my little Benji.
Perfect.
Hey, little B.
So we'll get started now. So my goal with today's lesson is to leave you guys with a powerful insight as to the fact that believing in God is not something that should remain in the synagogue. And by that, I don't mean that you should start putting on tefillin in the street, although that's also a great idea. If you'd like to become a Chabadnik, start putting on tefillin with people on the street. I highly encourage it, not during coronavirus, but afterwards, please pick up the mantle. That's a great idea. But what I mean by that is on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to assume that, like me, all of you suffer from stress, anxiety, and things like that to a greater or lesser degree because we're all human. And because we all like to convince ourselves that we are in control of what's going on in this world. That being said, one of the powerful lessons, the powerful takeaways from this lesson is going to be, let's leave a little bit more to God. Let's understand what it means to have faith and to have trust in Hashem. So one thing to bear in mind is that while this lesson was originally intended to talk a lot about monotheism, and we're still going to talk about that, we're still going to follow the text, we're still going to follow the same thread, we will be focusing on that faith and trust aspect. In other words, believing in God in a way that we can trust in Him and actually lean on Him and hopefully lead less stressful lives because we understand that we have faith in God. So while we go through the lesson, I'm going to be skimming through other parts and then kind of broadening other parts to focus on those points. For starters, let's start off with a question for discussion. Arnold, why don't we start with you? Why don't you read for us this question?
Is monotheism significant only to your religious views and religious life? Or would you say that belief in exclusively one God also impacts your feelings about life in general, and in what way?
Perfect. So what this question for discussion is asking us, and I encourage any of you, if you have a pen and paper, take a moment because this will serve you well at the end of the lesson. If you have a pen and paper, if you need to get up to go and get one, don't worry about it. We'll be a minute here. And try to write down for yourself, let's just take in the past 6 months. In the past 6 months, you've obviously thought about the fact that God is one and monotheism, a little bit, some, to a greater or lesser degree. How much time have you spent thinking about that? But much more importantly than how much time you spend thinking about that, what are those times? In other words, what do you associate with thinking about God as being the one creator, omnipotent, omniscient, etc., but particularly the one creator? In other words, the fact that there's one God, monotheism, which Judaism is a monotheistic religion. When do you think about that? Most importantly, this question is asking you to put down, when do you think about that? Is it only, in other words, I'm going to assume the last time you were in shul, if you were at least thinking a half an ounce about your davening, even if it wasn't the most meditative and super connected davening with God, but if you were praying to God, presumably you at least thought about the fact that you believe in a God at one point during that moment. But let's try to think a little bit beyond that frame. In other words, beyond that box into which we've put God, which is the synagogue, which is our prayers, which is anything ritualistic, whether it's tefillin or Shabbat candles or praying to God or making challah, which is also for the women, and which is a very powerful. These are all very powerful moments to connect with God and to think about monotheism. But how much beyond that? In other words, when's the last time you thought about God in a stressful situation? You're stuck in traffic. About Hashem in that way.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
It might sound strange, but I actually wanted to ask that yesterday when you said we should think about that. And I thought maybe I misunderstood. But here now it seems like the focus is also on monotheism. So is the question about thinking about God in general, or why do you believe, or do we believe in just one as opposed to multiple gods? Because it seems like it focuses on the one God.
Absolutely. For the purposes of this conversation, let's talk about the fact that there's one God. So presumably when you daven, sometimes that occurs to you. You know you're not davening to the sun in order for the sun to give you, right? You know you're not davening to some form of avodah zarah, some form of idol worship, right?
Exactly.
When is the last time you thought about the fact that God is one outside of those experiences?
Okay.
Okay? In other words, in connection with your feelings, in connection with your stress level. Because it turns out, I'm just going to keep talking while other people are filling out their views here, because this is really, we're going to come back to at the end of the lesson that hopefully we'll have learned something, we'll have gained something. It turns out that it's actually very much connected. In other words, when we say that there's one God, that is a crucial element, and one of the things that we gain from that is a crucial element of our belief system, obviously, but one of the things that we gain from that is not just the ritualistic parts, but also how it affects us on a day-to-day basis, how we go about our lives. We'll talk about that. Okay, let's move on. Let's open with a little bit of a discussion, because if we're going to talk about monotheism, in other words, the belief in one God, we definitely have to talk about paganism to a degree. I'm no expert in paganism, I'm no expert in idolatry, but what I would like to do is give a brief overview as to how idolatry came around. Why do I say so? Because, hold on. Shimon, I'm going to ignore questions in the chat for right now, just because it's a little hard for me to focus on the questions and keep the flow of the lesson, etc. So hold on, and I'll give some time for questions in just a moment. So where are we here? So why do I want to give a little bit of a brief overview of idolatry or paganism or believing in more than one God or in one God and some sort of underlinks? The reason I want to do so is because if you think about it, it doesn't really make much sense. God created Adam and Eve. Great. So far, presumably they believe in the one God. Their children, although they might have, and both of them sinned and they did things that maybe weren't the best in the eyes of God, but they believed in one God. And then at a certain point, we find that kind of wavers. And then comes the time of Noah, and there's a flood, and God erases the entire world, hits the reset button. And again, Noah presumably believed in the one God. He actually spoke to him. But when he does so, he comes out of the ark. Okay, he brings sacrifices to God. Great. Presumably his children believed in God. But fast forward a couple generations, again, people are serving idolatry. How does that happen? In other words, in today's day and age, if you have somebody who's a religious Jew and then you find out that they became idol worshippers, it's not so hard to understand how that happened. Maybe they went to India, maybe they were online and they were reading about it, and things became exciting. They saw this other point of view, and they were like, you know what? I don't know that this one is true. I don't know that that one is true. I'm going to follow that perspective. But idolatry, to begin with, first of all, wasn't around at a certain point. So how did it become around? Number one. Number two, whoever did start it, how did he have the audacity to do so? He presumably knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who had actually spoken with God, whether that was Adam or Noah. So it turns out that the Rambam, Maimonides, in his laws, as we mentioned, I think in the Sunday class, for those of you that were there, that the Rambam is the latest authority that we have who shares with halachic authority, who shares with us Jewish law to date That is the latest Jewish legal authority that does not limit his work to laws that apply today. In other words, the Shulchan Aruch, of course, if we want laws, we turn to the Shulchan Aruch, to the Jewish code of law. But the Jewish code of law, Rabbi Yosef Cairo chose to eliminate any laws which are not applicable today. So, for instance, laws that are connected to the Holy Temple, laws that are connected to in the land of Israel, certain ones of them, the ones that need a Jewish king, etc. He eliminates those laws and he doesn't talk about it at all. So Maimonides talks about laws that also apply in an era when idol worship is rampant. In other words, what are the laws of idol worship? So when he goes through them, he also chooses to give us a history of where idol worship started. So Baron, if I could ask you to read for us.
Thus, idolatrous beliefs spread throughout the world. People would worship images in all sorts of strange ways and offer sacrifices to them and bow down to them. As the years passed, the true God was forgotten from the minds of all people, and they gave him no recognition. The common people knew only the images of wood or stone in the temples of stone, which they had been raised from their youth to bow down to and worship, in whose name they took oaths. Even the priests and wise people among them believe that there is no God other than the stars and planets. For those sake, they had made those images.
So this is the end of the Rambam talking about this, and he starts off by saying as follows. He says it didn't really start with people bowing down to a graven image. What did it start with? So let's do a brief overview of idolatry, if you'll bear with me here, right? So, sorry, this was the slide from before. I'm not always so good about making sure the slides are in the right place. Okay, so it started off with honoring celestial beings. What happened? So a couple generations after Noah, in the Rambam's historical retelling, he says that it was in the times of a man whose name was Enosh. In any event, they started to worship celestial beings. What does that mean? It means that they said to themselves, God created the sun. The sun has power over the day. By the way, it says so even in the Bible, it says so. Obviously, they were putting way too much weight on this. But it does say that God put the sun to rule over the day. There's lots of commentary to discuss what that means. But they chose to interpret this as the sun actually has power. It actually gets to choose whether it gives us more light or not. And this might not have been step one, by the way. Step one might have been, although the sun cannot choose whether to shine on us or not, we choose to honor the sun because God chooses to honor the sun, because the sun is what gives us light, and way beyond light, even, helping sustenance in terms of things growing, etc. Beyond that came honoring them because we might get more from them. The more I honor the sun, the more the sun might give me. Okay, great. Step two, now, a couple generations beyond that, again, they still believe in God. They just believe that God put the sun and gave the sun power in order to be able to give us more or less. A couple generations later, some prophets arose and said, oh yeah, the sun sent us as a prophet. He doesn't have time for all of us. So he doesn't want us all serving him. Make an image. It should look like the sun, or it should be some sort of something reflecting the sun. And by the way, if you look in these ancient historical books, you see some of these things, that the original pagan deities were either forms of the sun or supposed to be the sun god and the god of the water and the god of the land, etc. As time went on, they actually ascribed power to those images, and hence we get what we know today as idolatry. So says the Rambam, in this way idolatry spread throughout the world. Oh, now we have an image. We believe that image actually has power. We believe that image actually can choose to give us more or less. Whether they remember the connection to the sun or they don't is irrelevant. The point is that they feel if they serve this image more, they're going to get more. If they serve this image less, they're going to get less. And therefore, now let's make a temple around the image. And now there can be a prophet for the image. How that prophet is elected is already, okay, he figured out his way to get into leadership. He was charismatic, whatever it was. And he started to tell them, do this, do that, etc. And so we now have idolatry. Fine. But the Rambam in a different work, so this was the Rambam in Mishnah Torah, the Rambam continues by, in his book, The Guide for the Perplexed, he continues to talk, well, not continues, but parallel discussion, he talks about idolatry from another perspective. Esther, can you read for us? 1b, text 1b. Hold on, you're muted.
Like that, can you hear me?
Now we hear you, go ahead.
It is well known that our patriarch Abraham was brought up among the Sabines, who believed that there is no divine being except the stars. In this chapter, I will survey their books and ancient chronicles that have been translated into Arabic, and I will depict their foolish beliefs and statements according to those books. You will see that they regard the stars as deities and the sun as the chief deity. They believe that all 7 stars and planets are gods, but the sun and the moon are greater than the rest. The Sabines thus believed that the universe had always existed because they believed the celestial beings to be gods. Continue?
Yes, please. Finish it off.
In accordance with these Sabine theories, they erected images corresponding to the celestial beings, golden images to the sun, silver images to the moon, and so on. Moreover, they associated various metals and climates with the powers of the planets, saying that certain planets are the gods of certain climatic zones. They built temples and placed images in them. They believed that the stars sent forth their influence upon these images, enabling these images to think, comprehend, communicate, and prophetically inform human beings concerning what is good for them.
Okay, so here we see already, as things evolve, that they actually begin to place weight and give these beings some form of power, and they feel that that the more they serve them, the more that they will give them. They built temples, they placed images in them. All right, great. And so he quotes the Sabaeans, which I don't know that there's a secular source that also quotes that I don't know who they are, the Sabaeans. But in any event, without getting too detailed, and this is where we'll end our conversation today on idolatry. But again, the reason we're talking about this, just to remind us of the goal here, we're trying to get to what weight does monotheism have in our lives beyond just the ritualistic element of it, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But for now, let's understand properly what idolatry is, and then we're immediately going to move on to examining what Judaism has to say about monotheism. In other words, the Torah and how the Torah describes God. So for now, just to wrap up our conversation, let's quote Lord Jonathan Sacks. Stephanie, do you have the ability to read for us? Can you unmute yourself? We cannot hear you. Hold on.
Okay, you got me?
Yes, now we hear you. So text 1C is from a book called A Letter in the Scroll, which is actually interesting. I'm in the middle of reading this book right now. I read this chapter a couple, maybe 2-3 weeks ago. But the Lord Jonathan Sacks, former chief rabbi of England, and a well-known scholar, particularly a Jewish scholar, but also just a scholar in his own right. He kind of summarizes how idolatry went throughout the ages since the Sabaeans or anything in that era. So Stephanie, go ahead.
1B?
Yes, 1C.
Oh, 1C, okay. It says here, just as 3 were many stars and planets and countless species of animals, so there were many gods. They fought, struggled, and established hierarchies and dominance, slowly establishing order out of chose. We have many records of these ancient times, and though the name of the gods change depending on whether we speak of
Mesopotamia, Egypt, Canaan, these are ancient cities. Egypt still exists today. The others are that area, the Middle East.
Okay, ancient Greeks. And the stories are remarkably similar. The gods of the skies does battle with the gods of the seas. And let's see if I can go on. And out of the victory established dry land, usually over the dead bodies of the slain victims. the gods of the lightning and the rain impregnated
Impregnates.
the goddess of the earth. And thus crops grew and the lands bring forth its produce. There is no sharp distraction between nature, the animals, the gods, and the mankind. In the stories they told about them, the gods, they usually personifications of the forces of nature, the sun, the sea, the wind, and the rain. In the ancient world was one of which order was constantly threatened by chose, at times in the form of floods and droughts, at others by war from invading tribes. Through the stories they told, they explained to themselves why it is so. Disturbance of the reflect of an ultimate struggle elsewhere between the gods. If the gods of the sky won his battle with the sea, there would be no floods that year. If the gods of the rain successfully mated with the gods of the soul, the harvest was good humanly, and the various graduations is replaceable.
So if there's one thing we see here as a consistency, it's that they use these stories of these so-called gods, whether it's the god of the sea, the god of the sky, the god of the grain, the god of the whatever it is, they use these stories to explain different happenings that were happening. Remember, they lived in a time when there would be a great flood and many people would be wiped out, right? There would be a plague, pardon the pun, and millions of people, whatever, hundreds of thousands of people would die, whatever the number was. And to them, these things were on account of what they call the gods. Well, who were these, the gods? These were the god of the sea, the god of the heavens, that when they're arguing with each other, so then the sea all of a sudden overflows and there's a tsunami and whatever. So all of these natural things, they believe that any chaos that happens down here in this world is as a result of the fact that something is going on between the gods. We down here, human beings, oh, forget us. We're like, a drop in the ocean. We're really not worth anything, right? We're just suffering the consequences of these either positive or negative associations between the gods. So this is, again, it's a summary. If you study this as a topic, you'll get lots. But the point that we're trying to get out of here is exercise 2.1. I know you guys don't have textbooks in front of you, it's just online, but try to go through this with me, right? Exercise 2.1. What's going on over here, right? Sorry, that's the wrong thing. That was what I wanted to do. There we go. Exercise 2.1. What is going on? Considering the pagan beliefs described in text 1a through 1c, that's Maimonides, both in his Mishnah Torah and in the Guide for the Perplexed, that is Jonathan Sachs, and really everything you know about paganism. Let's try to do a check or an X to see if any of the following attributes would apply to any of the gods that they believed in. Okay, of course we would never use the term the one. You know what? Why don't we have somebody else go through this? Leah, do you want to go through this for us? Leah, unmute yourself. If you can go through this and you just give us your opinion, and we'll kind of discuss it as we go along. These 11 things, would you put a check or an X? Does this or does this not apply to these pagan beliefs which we've just been discussing? Go ahead.
Well, I will, but I don't think I should have to fill out all 11. I think somebody else can volunteer.
You'll soon
so I think I can call on people.
You'll soon see it's fairly easy. Go ahead.
Right, the one and only, no, I wouldn't put an X. Yes, I would here. He precedes and transcends all of nature. Yes.
Who does?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, does not is the answer. Right.
No, right, no.
Non-material.
That's the easiest one. Number one is the easiest one. The one and only, we certainly would never say the one and only about these pagan gods. Okay, let's keep going.
No, I wouldn't say it about number 2. I would say it about number 3. No, or wouldn't I?
Well, not at least not the way the Rambam describes it, the way that my mind.
No, exactly not. Right.
Non-material.
Okay, definitely not omnipotent. Can't create something from nothing. Is not exclusive.
Let's just talk about why, by the way, not just randomly, but let's talk about why many of these things, and I believe all of them don't, and if anybody doesn't, I'd love to hear from you, why these things don't apply. The one and only, okay, obviously we have many, there are many gods being discussed. There's the guy of the sky, the god of the land, the god of whatever it is, right? Precedes and transcends all nature. If you believe that the sun was created by this God, or that in general, one God might have been created out of maybe two other gods mating, then how do they proceed and transcend all of nature? They don't. They're a part of nature, and nature is chaos. The same thing with non-material. They're certainly material. They are based off of celestial beings or the like. Omnipotent, certainly not. For those of you that are not familiar, the word omnipotent means all-powerful. We certainly wouldn't say that because they clearly are losing and winning in battle, so there's ups and downs. Creating something from nothing, which is ex nihilo, is something from nothing. No, they themselves were created from other things, and they certainly, when they create other things, they're just kind of giving us energies. In exclusive control of everything, certainly not. If they are, then how would there ever be able to be battles? That they're kind, that they create benevolently, number 7, I don't think that I would say so, because they don't seem to care that much about us. Very often, they do things that put us at risk, and we feel like they're not creating benevolently, even if they are doing things. Just and righteous wouldn't seem so. And the same with the last 3, creates purposefully, cares about the happenings in the universe, and holds humankind in high regard. We certainly wouldn't say that they care an ounce about what goes down here in this world, or with regards to humans, for sure not, because that's not what they care about. They care about winning their battle. They care about mating with whichever other god they care about. In the description we're getting about what it means to be a pagan god, those would be your priorities. The reason this exercise is so important is because when we contrast it with God, which we're going to do in just a moment in Bereshit, when God creates the world, we will see that there are certain things which are emphasized there, which specifically are driving home not just number 1, which means that God is one and only, but also that there are other things that are going on here. Let's summarize some of these points here in this. Maybe we should have done this originally, gone through here, right? So if there are many competing forces creating the world, certainly not omnipotent, not in total control. If nature always existed, certainly they cannot create ex nihilo. If there are personal interests and competition, wars, matings, etc., they're not righteous and benevolent. They only care about themselves. And the same thing, hold on, if they must be indifferent to humanity if there's absolutely no concern for us. Okay, into all of this is born a man you guys may or may not have heard of. His name is Avraham Avinu, right? So here's where we are. Avraham Avinu is born into this world and knows, by the way, no other option. The last person that he knows that spoke with God, or that even believed in one true God, is anybody? Noah. Noah was the last person that he knew who believed in one God. So Abram is born, and there's lots of discussion about where he went and what he did and exactly how he discovered God. According to most opinions, it was a slow journey that happened somewhere between the age of 3 and the age of 40, maybe the age of 80, by the way. In any event, it was a slow journey for him. He discovered God. He was continually discovering different elements of God, and slowly he began to actually spread this to the world. Primarily, the text that we'll read now is a medrash from Bereshit. We learn about the fact that, hold on, we used to have this on 2 pages. How do we do that? Hold on, I think if we zoom out one more. I don't know, we lost it. In any event, there's a medrash in Bereshit, which is text 2 here, which shares with Shlomo. Hopefully you can read that for us if you can unmute yourself, which tells us about how it was that Avram Avinu discovered God. Go ahead.
A parallel. A man was traveling from one place to another and encountered a well-lit palace. He said, "Is it possible that this palace has no master?" The owner of the palace looked out and said, "I am the master of the palace." Similarly, our father Abraham said, "Is it fathomable that this world has no master?" God looked out and said to him, "I am the master of the universe." This is the background behind God said to Abraham.
Right, so God said to Abraham is the first time that God speaks to Abraham. This is at the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha, and God speaks to Abraham and he says, "Lech Lecha me'aretzecha," go forth from your land, etc., as we know. But particularly, what Abraham saw, what we see from this text, is that when everyone else looked at the world and they saw chaos, they saw battles between gods, they saw matings between gods, they saw selfish gods, they saw Avram looked at all of this and he saw harmony. He saw wondrous harmony between creation. In fact, one of the midrashim, I feel like maybe this is in Seder Hadorot. In any event, I don't remember exactly where it is, but describes that the way that Avram discovered God was, he was looking up, he saw the sun, he decided the sun must be the one that created the world, because everything seems to be revolving around the sun, etc. Fine. And then at night, he saw the moon. Obviously, it wasn't the next night, it took time, and he meditated on this, and he recognized, if the moon can push away the sun, and the moon has all these stars around it, the moon must be God. And then the sun pushes away the moon. So and in other words, it was this harmony that he saw, the way the sun and the moon seem to operate on a cycle. There seems to be a process here, not just the sun and the moon. There's the water, there's the tides. We're not given all the details as to exactly what Avram thought about, but it was that harmony that pushed him to say, this is such a beautifully well-lit palace, this is such an orderly world, there must be somebody who creates it. I know a lot of these words right now may sound ironic. And that's because we're talking about them at a time when the world doesn't seem orderly at all. But the goal of our conversation today is going to be to reach a stage where we can see order even at a time when the world does seem chaotic, as it does today. So without further ado, let's see how Maimonides, how the Rambam describes Avram's discovery of God. Yes. One more point which I should share with you is that as Avram discovered this, he began to share this with other people, and monotheism began to slowly spread throughout the world. But let's see how the Rambam addresses this discovery of the one true God in his Guide for the Perplexed. Leah, can you read for us, please?
As Abraham, the pillar of the world, matured, it became clear to him that there is a divine being who is abstract, neither a body nor a force residing in a body, and that all the planets and the stars are his doing. He understood the worthlessness of the nonsense with which he had been raised, and he began to disprove their beliefs and demonstrate the fallacy of their outlook. He publicly taught otherwise and called in the name of the God of the world, proclaiming the existence of God and his creation of the universe.
Okay. So this is Abraham who begins to discover the oneness of God. I think we all know the rest of the story. Am I correct? Abraham discovers the one true God. He has children. God promises him that he will have children and grandchildren. He will grow to be a great nation. He does. He goes on to be the father of the Jewish people. The whole story with Jacob, his son Joseph. They go down to Egypt. Eventually, the Jews go into Egypt. And slavery in Egypt, and then the exodus from Egypt when they reached Mount Sinai. I know that was a very quick Jewish history, but I'm going to assume that most people on this class and those that are watching on Facebook are aware of it. Now is a good time to say that if you're watching on Facebook and you'd like to join our conversation, in other words, be a part of it, read the text with us, ask questions when you'd like to, please join us on Zoom. I left a link down below in the comments. So, where are we here? We've arrived at the way that God reveals himself to the Jews at Mount Sinai. It's a great story. If you haven't watched the 10 Commandments and you've got more time to watch Netflix now, I highly recommend downloading it, renting it, whatever you do, and watching the 10 Commandments. Charleston Heston does a great job. But for now, let's follow the biblical account, all right? So, preceding... Oh, hi Menachem. Menachem is coming to say hello. You want to see Tati teaching? Okay.
Everybody unmute so we can all say hello.
Hi, little one.
Hello, Menachem.
Oh.
Hello, Menachem.
Hello, hello. Hey, beautiful.
Hello, Menachem. Is
Say
that
hi,
Kitty
Shimon.
as well?
Say hi, Baron. Say hi, Leah.
Hi.
Say
Hi,
Menachem.
Hi, Menachem.
We're just taking a quick coffee break. If anybody needs a coffee,
Now it feels exactly like Mishpucha gathering.
Yeah.
Say hi,
Right.
Marguerite.
Good old was.
We can't see you, Marguerite. Say hi, Arnold. Say hi, Shimon.
Hi, Menachem.
Oh, look, Esther has the dolly again, remember? Remember the dolly from last time?
It's a beaver.
It's a beaver, see that? Tati has a book? Yeah. Because that's what happens when you teach, Menachem. You have to have a book. Okay.
Are you going to sleep soon? Are you going to bed? Are you going to say good night?
Go take a bath and go to sleep.
Good
Good
enough.
night. Good night.
All right. So we've arrived now at the biblical narrative, which we would like to contrast with the with what we've now learned about idolatry. So we've kind of summarized 11 points here, which you can take away from paganism. Let's talk about the contrast to that when you do believe in one God, in monotheism, at least in the biblical narrative, the way that the Torah describes it. Okay, so we've arrived at an exercise, which is, we'll read this together. The following paragraphs are segments of the story of creation as related in the first chapter of Genesis. I'm going to assume everybody here is familiar with the first chapter of Genesis. If you're not, you've got it in front of you.
Could you zoom in on the page a little bit?
No, we actually need 2 pages. Hold on one second.
Arnold, do you know it by heart?
I don't remember how we make it 2-page view. How did I do that? What happened last time? Full page, and then no. We don't need that. But we do want the 2-page view. How do we get that? We had that before. Here we go.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Our goal now is as follows. As you read these passages, which you're familiar with, by the way, and they do skip a little bit because they don't want to bore you too much. Everybody knows most of it. Try to identify what is said and what is not said, how Judaism views God and his act of creation, and then enter your findings in the chart that follows. I know we don't have our textbooks in front of us. It's online. This is coronavirus times. This is what's going on. But here's what I'd like to point out to you. Of course, the one and only, that's going to be obvious. That's going to be clear in the narrative of Genesis, that's going to be something true about God if you're looking at God from a Jewish perspective, from a monotheistic perspective. All right. That he precedes and transcends all nature is evident from the first verse, which is Bereshit bara Elokim, that God created the world. Fine, great. Non-material, that seems clear right away. It says that God filled the entire world. It says that before the world was created, God existed. Okay, great. That he's omnipotent seems to be evident from the fact that he can do whatever he wants. Whatever he wants happens. That he creates something from nothing. Again, we see that he creates. Here's the points that I want to talk. I want to talk about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. In other words, the fact that when God creates, it's not just that God is in full control. It's not just that God creates the world ex nihilo. It's not just that God is non-material, but it's the fact that when God creates, he creates specifically. He creates purposefully. He cares about specifically the human being and about the world in general. And about the fact that when he does so benevolently, and he does so with justice and righteousness. Where do we see this in the accounting of Genesis? Let me call your attention to the fact that every time, and you can read this in the text in front of you, every time that God creates the world, and by that I mean any portion of the world. In other words, day 1, light and dark. Day 2, as we go along, God makes the grass spread forth, and he makes the trees spread forth, and he puts animals to roam the land, the waters, and he separates the water from the ground, and he puts fish and birds and everything that there is. As God does so, there's an interesting thing going on here. You see, if I were to write this book, I would just assume that whoever's writing it is going to know that if he did it, that's what happened. Even if I assume that there's a critic here who believes that, maybe God tried to create the world and that he wasn't successful, I would just suffice by at one point saying everything that God wanted, that's what came to be. But the Torah doesn't choose to do so. And by the way, this is the same Torah which many of you come with me on a weekly basis, and we have wine and wisdom, and we discuss, a particular nuance in a particular verse. This is the Torah which is like super precise and super concise. The Torah chooses every single day of creation to end with the following words. Number 1, Vayehi chen. After it says God wanted, or it doesn't say God wanted, it says God said, let there be light. It says there was light, and then it says it happened exactly. Vayehi chen, and it was so. This reminds me, I'm in the middle of teaching a second grader. I'm tutoring a second grader. Some of you know him, Mortimer Kaufman. And we're going through the same thing. We're going through Genesis. Obviously, I'm also teaching him Hebrew, and I'm teaching him, the roots of the word. So we're going much slower, and we're learning writing, etc. But as we go through it, I pointed out to him that the words Vayehi chen, and it was so, appear over and over and over again, and that's why he has to know what it means by the time we get to it the third time or the fourth time, right? Every time, again and again, and it was so. It was exactly as God intended for it to happen. It was. Almost as if the Torah is trying to prove to us in some way that, yes, God can do anything he wants to, as if that's an important aspect in believing in God. And the same thing is with regards to the next line, again, on every single day of creation, on one day it even says it twice, which is Vayar Elokim Ki Tov. It doesn't. The Torah doesn't suffice by which means that God saw that it was good. The Torah does not suffice by just telling us that God created X, Y, and Z. Each time the Torah tells us that He created something, it says God kind of sat back, Vayar Elokim, and God saw Ki Tov that it was good. Why was it so important that God should see that it was good? Almost as if, again, the Torah is trying to point out to us that God did, that if anything would have been created bad outside of the way God intended it for it. Heaven forbid, right? Such a thing is impossible. But if anything would have, then God would have changed it almost. That God made sure that each time it was good, that what he was doing was good and just and kind. Okay. One more element here to point out is that when God creates the world, it clearly leads and builds to the creation of man on the sixth day. And when God creates man, he gives him specific instructions. He's the only being which God creates, and then gives him specific instructions how he should exist. And so we see clearly that there's clearly a feeling of purpose here, a feeling of purpose for humanity, a feeling of caring what humanity is going to do. And before we keep going in the text, let's summarize those points here, because I want to contrast them against what we had in the pagan belief in God's, right? So number one, we have the fact that God is the one and only. How do we do this? I think we move it up here like this. Yeah, there we go. It's out of the way. Yeah, that God created. We find Bereshit bara in the singular. There's only one God. Precedes it and transcends nature. God is creating nature, so therefore, obviously, he precedes it. All right, we went through all of these points. Okay, I feel like this slide is maybe a little extra. Maybe it should have been there before with the visuals. That not everybody is an audio learner. Some people are visual learners. In any event, these are the 11 points which we're trying to make about the difference between a monotheistic religion and a religion that believes in multiple gods. We'll go through them slowly just to recap what's going on here. This is what I was talking about, the fact that it says good 6 times, the fact that it says very good once.
Well, Rabbi, was it day 3, Tuesday, when he said very good?
No, on day 3 he said it was good twice.
Oh, he said it was good twice.
Okay, and now we've arrived at one of the
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Just quickly, I was thinking that the fact that it ended always with "it was so" was the element that showed the purpose, and not the omnipresent.
And not what?
When you go one more slide back.
Yes. Oh, sorry, I have to go back slowly. Yeah, go ahead.
Here, the omnipotent, and it says it was so. For me, the "and it was so" would be more with the proof that it was on purpose, purposefully, or what it.
100%. But it can point out both of those points. In other words, there's the fact that it's purposeful, but there's also the fact that it was so. In other words, the Torah is almost proving a point here. God is omnipotent. He can do whatever he wants, whatever he says to happen. And it was so. It was exactly as it was. In other words, I could walk around tomorrow and I could say, let there be light. Let there sprout forth vegetation. Let this coronavirus disappear from the world. If it doesn't happen, right, that's crucial to God being omnipotent. Those words are showing that. Does that make sense? It's also showing the purpose, which I think we mentioned earlier. I don't remember which one it was.
The purpose is at the end, I think.
Next one, hold on.
It was, creates.
Right. So here they're pointing out that it's not just that he created for it was good. It's almost like God had a plan as to exactly what he wanted it to look like, and then it looked exactly like he wanted it to look. I guess that's what they're bringing out, the good and very good. In any event, now we arrive to what is the benefit of having such a God. Okay, now.
But Rabbi?
Yes, Yosef Ilan.
having created everything the way he wanted, that doesn't mean that everything in that creation works only in one particular way and not in any other way, because there is freedom. We have freedom of choice.
Well,
and we could exit his choice.
I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of the freedom of choice that a human being has to do or not to do what God wants in this world. But let's suffice it to say that beyond our choices, okay, let's not talk about our choices. Let's talk about things being created in this world. In other words, trees growing and not trees planted by human beings. Let's just talk about the world operating, nature, let's call it.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
At least from that perspective, let's call it very specific and very purposeful, etc. The truth of the matter is that Jewish belief definitely mandates that we believe, and I understand that this might get a little bit complicated philosophically, but the truth of the matter is that God, we do believe that God is omnipotent, even with regards to our own choice, that God runs everything that happens in this world. How those two work in tandem is a good question beyond the scope of today's lesson. Is that fair to say?
Got it.
I think that would be a great rabbit hole. But one very valuable thing that you pointed out, Arnold, which I'd like to share with everybody, which is as follows. Many of you are familiar with this already, but the Baal Shem Tov, and this is not a text in the lesson, which is why I'm sharing it off the top of my head. The Baal Shem Tov points out that there's a verse in Tehillim which says, "La'olam Hashem dvar chanitza b'shamayim," that God, your words are forever in the heavens. And he points out that this talks about the creation of the world. So it turns out that the Baal Shem Tov is pointing out that the creation of the world wasn't just something that happened 5,780 odd years ago. In other words, 5,780 and a couple months. No. What the Baal Shem Tov is saying is that the world gets recreated at every single moment because God is, at this moment right now, what that narrative, which is discussed in Bereshit, in Genesis, is re-happening, if that's a word, right now. What do we mean by that? God is saying, let there be light, and light is happening. God is saying, at least right now, God is saying, let there be dark, right? And there's dark happening. And at every single moment, God is recreating all of these things. And this is a very powerful point, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, about how that should affect our relationship with God, which is step 2 of this lesson, which we're really about to jump into, which is the gift of purpose and the gift of hope. What we mean by that is that when we walk around, we have to recognize that the world is being created in a way of vayehi chen, and it was so. In other words, the world is being created in a way that it's happening exactly as God wishes it to be, which is a very powerful point, which we'll talk about shortly. All right. Are we ready to jump into section 2? Everybody with me here? Give me a thumbs up if you're
Yes.
Or ask a question if you're ready to ask a question. Okay. So then let's jump right into it. The gift of purpose. So back to our textbook. Text 4 is again from Chief Rabbi, or former Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, again in the book, The Letter of the Scroll. And this is what he chooses to contrast. He kind of summarizes the difference between pagan gods and the belief in one God. Who hasn't read for us yet? I think Shimon said he's not feeling well. He doesn't want to read.
I have not.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead?
Okay, the account of creation in the first chapter of Genesis is stunningly original, quite unlike in any other in antiquity. There is no contending forces, no battles of the gods, no capricious spirits. God speaks, and the universe comes into being. God is not in nature, but above it, transcending it and ordering it according to his word. Nature has no will or set of wills of its own. This is an immense intellectual leap. If God created the world, then it is, in principle, intelligible. The myths of irrationality have been dispelled.
So where are we going here? We're going to, one second, if we've arrived at a place where there's one God that created the entire world, not just that one God created the entire world, but he created it purposefully. So then, whoa, now we could start to talk about the fact, well, how does that affect us on a daily level? We could say there's purpose. If I believe in a God that mated with another God, the God of the sea and the God of the ocean mated, whatever, the God of the seas and the God of the heavens mated, and that's how the earth was created, or that two gods fought war and that's how, I don't know, whatever, a hurricane formed. So then how am I ever to believe that when I walk around and I choose to drink this water, not to drink this water, like Yosef Ilan said, but freedom of choice or not, when I choose to do something, how can I ever convince myself that's purposeful? That makes any difference to the gods, or even to myself, or to my fate, or to anything? They've got their whole own thing going on, and I'm just a symptom. However, when we start to believe that there's one God who created the world, so now we're like, okay, so now when I follow him, I might understand reward and punishment. He might want things to work a certain way. He might have had a certain goal in mind when he created the world, right? Now, regardless of what the goal of God creating the world is, and this is important, because forget, let's not even talk about Judaism, because that's when you start to get ritualistic. The goal of our class today is not to get ritualistic. Let's not talk about tefillin. Let's not talk about Pesach Seder, none of that. Because that's all already defining, which a large portion of the Torah is focused on that. That's already talking about defining what is the purpose for which we were created, right? But let's talk about that feeling of purpose, that feeling of me being able to walk around and say, yes, I mean something in this world, which only exists when those 11 boxes are checked as yes, and not when those 11 boxes are checked as no. Only when you believe in one God who created the world on his own, and who preceded the world, and who wanted the world in a specific way. It happened in that specific way, and he wanted to do so for a specific purpose, right? I know there were like 11 things, I'm kind of summarizing them, but that's when you begin to have a purpose in your life. You can walk around and believe in something, right? This is nowhere better evidence than in Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which I'm sure many of you have read. I personally have, and where his point is to start. I mean, of course, he was a contemporary to Freud, or a student of Freud, and he took his own perspective, whatever. Without getting into Viktor Frankl's whole history, what is his purpose in Man's Search for Meaning? His point is, and text 5 says it the best. I'll read this. You know what? Why don't we go back to the beginning? Arnold, you need to unmute yourself. Text 5.
Okay. He who has a why to live for can hear without almost anyhow. Right?
He says the reason that it's so important for a person to understand and to believe in their purpose in this world is because if you have a how, if you have a why for which you live, then you can withstand any how. Think about the fact that right now we're sitting here in a virtual class and learning Torah. Why are we spending so much time doing it? Because we believe this is a purpose in our lives. And by the way, I don't care if the purpose in your life is to make cans of seltzer or to make pens. I don't care what your purpose is. If that's your purpose, then now you have a reason to live. You have a reason to do something. You have a reason to bring something about. Many of you have been to other classes where I've shared that in my previous post as a rabbi of the Upper East Side of Manhattan, one of our responsibilities was to visit people in hospitals. And very often you walk into somebody who says, Rabbi, what do I need from you? Don't tell me it's Torah, don't put on tefillin with me, don't do any of this stuff. All I want from you is remind me why I'm alive, remind me why I should keep fighting. You're talking to people who are, whether they're cancer survivors or whether they're deathly ill patients, or whether it's even people that are not deathly ill, they're just in extreme pain. And I'm not talking about people who are so far along that they need to make a decision whether to pull the plug or not, just on a simple level, right? Every doctor will tell you that a patient needs the will to fight, right? It's very important to stay positive, right? Why? So what would I share with them? I would always share with them that you should know, without getting into too much detail, but that Jewish sources talk about a neshama, a soul, and that a soul that is outside of a body, whether it's that soul has passed on already, or whether that soul hasn't come into existence yet. In other words, it hasn't come into this world yet. It's still whatever, or angels. They're all envious of the fact that a neshama can do a mitzvah with a body. Right? Now, the purpose of my telling him this, let's talk about that, right? And I would share this with him, of course, because I would say, even if you're only going to live for one more day, I mean, I would never use this terminology with him, but the purpose of where I was getting with him was, even if you could just live to put on tefillin one more time. And by the way, this explains why Chabadniks are so crazy and rabbis are so crazy about putting on tefillin. Just put it on one more time. Put it on. I didn't put it on yesterday, Rabbi. I'm not going to put it on tomorrow. I'm not becoming religious. What does it help you if I put on tefillin? You know why? Because when you put on tefillin, that itself is the purpose. But why was I sharing this with him? I was sharing this with him because very often when people recognize that there's a purpose to being down here in this world, right? That itself gives them the drive to live. We all know this on a day-to-day basis, by the way. When we walk around, when we can understand that we have a purpose for which we exist in this world, any stressful situation becomes easier to handle because we understand that there's a single creator who created the world. And that leads me to ask the question, what was his purpose in creating us? And that leads me to the purpose in life. And that is the most powerful motivator for anything that we're trying to accomplish in life. whether that's surviving holed up in your house, or whether that's surviving with the coronavirus and you're, not you, but somebody's on their deathbed. That single point, that purpose is extremely powerful, and that only comes when you believe in the one true God. Okay, let's move on. Okay, here they kind of chew over this point again, how this goes, and how with pagan beliefs you don't get to that, and with believing in one true God you do get to that. But I feel like we did that enough. Let's talk about point number 2, gift number 2. When you believe in one God, and you believe that God created purposefully, and you believe that God not only created purposely, but wants your best, wants the best for the world, this leads us to the gift of hope, the gift of believing in God, of having faith in God. Okay. Text 6 is from a man named Huston Smith. I had never read this before reading this this textbook, but he talks about how Jews forever and beyond have always had, and this has helped them to survive, have had what we call hope or faith or bitachon in Hashem. Leah, why don't you read for us text 6?
The God of the Jew possessed none of these traits, which in greater or lesser degree characterize the gods of their neighbors. It is here that we come to the supreme achievement of Jewish thought, in the character it ascribed to the God it discovered to be one. The Greeks, the Romans, the Syrians, and most of the other Mediterranean peoples would have said 2 things about their gods' characters. First, the gods tend to be amoral. Second, toward man, they are preponderantly indifferent. The Jews reversed the thinking of their contemporaries on both points. Whereas the gods of Olympus tirelessly pursued beautiful women, the God of Sinai watches over the widows and orphans.
How powerful is that last line, right? In other words, if you want to sum it up in a nutshell, if you believe in a pagan God, they are selfish in nature. They don't care about what happens to you, and they are not kind. At least not in any of the discussions that there are about the pagan gods. In the discussion about God in Genesis, that is one of the points that we've seen over and over again, that God both creates purposefully and that God creates kindly. Let's keep reading a little bit. Text 7. Shlomo, you want to read for us? Text 7. This is another. This is from a book called The Intellectual Adventure of Ancient Man. Again, about these pagan gods, and then we'll talk about the gift of hope that you have when you believe in the one true God. Go ahead. Shlomo, you're still muted. Don't worry, we're all getting used to this new technology.
There, is it better?
Yes, go ahead.
Throughout the Mesopotamian text, we hear overtones of anxiety, which seem to express a haunting fear that the uncountable and turbulent powers may at any time bring disaster to human society.
They were always living in fear of the gods. They were always living like, what is going to happen next with these gods that's going to affect me in a certain way? The exact opposite is true when it comes to monotheism. What do we see?
How so? Because we're told to fear God too.
Oh, well, first of all, we're not told to fear God in terms of be afraid that he's going to do something negative to us. The exact opposite. We're always told that God is true, is loving, he is kind, and he's benevolent towards us. When we say fear, and many books have actually stopped translating yira as fear, and they translate more as reverence. We should be in awe of him. We should the way you would fear a king. Not always was fear of a king because I'm afraid of you that you might put me to death. Fear of a king was very often just the very fact that I'm in his presence is like, that's the type of fear we're supposed to have towards God, right? Am I understanding you correctly?
It's a Middle English translation, which is the faulty translation for us.
Could be. In any event, most modern translations of these books, when fear has come to mean, I'm afraid that I'm going to get coronavirus, I'm afraid that there's going to be an earthquake, I'm afraid that something's going to happen to me, they've stopped translating it that way, and they've started translating it as, I think the best I've seen so far is reverence. In any event, we're never told to be afraid of God and he may put us to death. Leah, I'm sorry?
That was me, Esther. I said highest respect, like before a judge.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, right. So where do we see this difference of being afraid of God, or the difference when we see in the creation of the world? We see it not just in the words that it was so and it was good. I'm trying to get past this. How do I get past? Here we go. But we see it that monotheism emphasizes a three-step process. Number one, God is inherently good. Number two, God is powerful. And number three, God loves his creations. Let's come back to this in just a moment. Let's see an ancient Jewish text from, I believe, the 1100s. The 11th century, so not the 11th, the 1100s. In any event, let's see, Esther, why don't you read for us? Rabbi Bachya ibn Pakuda, in his work, Chovas HaLevavos, otherwise known as Duties of the Heart, he shares with us how a person can walk around life when there's a Holocaust going on, when there's, not comparing it to when there's a coronavirus going on, or even when there's just the day-to-day stress of life. How can we walk around and still feel like we believe in one God? Go ahead. Esther, text 8a.
Yes. When you know that there are people who have compassion and pity for you, you will trust them and be at peace in all matters upon which you depend on them, provided that they are strong, undefeatable, and cannot be prevented from fulfilling what is requested of them. But if they are weak, they cannot be relied upon, even if it is clear that they are compassionate and caring, due to the many areas in which they are restricted. In addition, you must be certain that they are absolutely generous and kind. Now, if people were to have all these traits, it would behoove those who know this to place their trust in them and to be totally at peace, internally and externally, in their hearts and limbs, and to be faithful to them and to accept and favorably regard all their judgments and actions.
Elsewhere in this book, Chovas HaLevavos, and also in other works on faith and trust in God, our rabbis point out that one of the best examples of this is a child. I was actually thinking about this today as I was preparing this class, and then I had to take a break because that's how it works. Menachem is home, and Gitti is home, and there's all sorts of other things going on. So Menachem wanted to go down the stairs, and he knows how to walk down the stairs. He learned to walk a year ago. He knows how to walk, and he knows how to climb the stairs. He knows how to go down the stairs, etc. But he wasn't in the mood. I don't know if he had just woken up, but otherwise he was at the top of the stairs. And I've noticed that he started doing something recently. Whenever he wants to go down the stairs, and he calls me, carry me down the stairs instead of me walking down the stairs. And if I'm available to, I do. As I walk towards him, and this is really freaky, by the way, as an adult, he kind of lunges at me, literally throwing himself off of the top of the stairs into my arms. And many of our sages talk about this trust, this absolute trust, which is, I think, most evident in children to their parents. By the way, this is true even of 8-year-old children. The older we get, the less trust we have, because we lose our naivete. But this absolute trust which children have for their parents, why do they have it? It's built on a 3-step process. Number one, I believe that this person is an inherently good person. And this is why the most broken thing in society is someone who has an abusive parent and has lost that feeling for their parent. They no longer believe that their parent is inherently good. They no longer believe that parent has a love for them and cares for them and would do everything in their power to do for them. But beyond that, there's number two, which is God has unlimited abilities, or still working in the analogy, when Menachem throws himself off the top of the stairs, he believes that no matter what happens, I am the strongest man in the world, and I will figure out a way to catch him. Right? So it says, even Pakuda, if we can learn to mimic that trust which we have in a human being, whether that's a child for their parent, or whether that's a spouse for their spouse, or whether that's even just two friends. Very often we have people that we trust implicitly, right? And we trust them for two reasons. Number one, because we believe they have our best interests at heart and they love us. And number two, because we believe that they are strong and they have that ability to do whatever it is we need from them, right? When you tell somebody, I trust you, usually, even with regards to the simplest thing, right? Yosef Ilan, let's say you ask me to go to the store and buy you a good drink. You don't tell me what drink to buy, and I ask you which drink should I buy, and you say I trust you. It's because you believe you believe in my sense of taste. You believe whatever it is. You believe I have those capabilities, that talent to do whatever it is that you want me to do. And that's a very simplistic example, but this applies everywhere in life. Now, imagine you found a human being. Right now, you only trust me to a certain degree, Yosef Ilan. Right now, if you were about to jump off a building and you wanted me to catch you, you probably wouldn't trust me. Why? Because you don't believe that I'm strong enough, which is silly. You should. I work out. But you don't believe that I can catch you in my bare arms. That's what's going on here. Now imagine You were jumping off a roof, and you knew for a fact that the fellow who was at the bottom wasn't Zushi Rifkin, a rabbi in Pasadena who maybe runs once a week. Instead, it was Superman. You knew that this guy was Superman. You would jump off. It would be perfectly normal for you to jump off and say, he's going to catch me because he's Superman. You would have to know that Superman cares for you. If you know that Superman is in a fight with you, that would be a stupid thing to do, right? So these 3 points tie into form a faith and a trust which should be completely and totally reliant on God. What does that mean? When do we recognize these points about God? That God is, number 1, inherently good. Number 2, that God has unlimited abilities. And number 3, that God loves his creations. That should be so much more potent. That should be the most potent recipe that there is to stress-free living, to relaxation, to be reliant and understanding that God is the one in control at every moment. Rabbi Bachya Ibn Pakuda picks up where he left off. I think it was Esther reading for us. You want to finish off for us? Text 8b. Let me turn the page for you guys. Go ahead. Esther?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
just to unmute or mute. The benefits of trust in God include tranquility of the heart in the face of worldly worries. The one who has trust finds serenity, security, and peacefulness within this world. As it is written, blessed is the man who trusts in God. God will be his reassurance.
Now, don't you get me wrong. This is way easier said than done. But if we actually focused and spend time thinking on a regular day-to-day basis that God exists, God is recreating the world right now, and he's recreating it in a certain moment. One of our biggest issues, I'm not sure if any of you saw that article by Rabbi Moss. I will try to send it out after the class. I'll certainly put it in the Facebook comments on this video. There's an article by Rabbi Moss who's an Ask the Rabbi on Chabad.org. And I guess somebody asked him, how do I keep my faith and trust in God when he says, one of our issues is that we like to think that we are in control. He says, if we would recognize that we were never in control, if we would recognize that Hashem has always been the one in control, that would lead to an awesome tranquility. If we would recognize that God is recreating the world right now, and he has the choice whether to recreate the world from last second to this second. Does he continue with the coronavirus existing in this world, or does he not continue with the coronavirus existing? If we would recognize that and internalize that, and I understand that that's easier said than done, but if we would spend time at least once a day, if not 5, 10 times a day, at the very least in those moments, obviously this is not the way it should be, but at the very least in those moments when we feel stress, and when we do, if we would take a moment to think about this 3-pronged approach, that God is omnipotent. In other words, he can do whatever he wants. He's ultimately good, and he loves me and he cares for me. So then all stress should disappear. Let's see how this is how Rabbi Sachs, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs puts this. Shlomo, you read for us just recently. Baron, why don't you read for us? Text 9.
Hope is one of the very greatest Jewish contributions to the Western civilization, so much so that I have called Judaism the voice of hope in the conversation of humankind. In the ancient world, there was tragic cultures in which people believed that the gods were at best indifferent to our existence, at worst, actively malevolent. The best humans can do is avoid their attention or appease their wrath. In the end, though, it is all in vain. We are destined to see our dreams wrecked on the rocks of reality. The great tragedians were Greek. Biblical Hebrew did not even contain a word that meant tragedy. In the Greek sense, modern Hebrew had to borrow the word, hence tragedia. Hope.
The Hebrew word for tragedy is tragedia.
Hope is not unknown in such cultures, but it is what Aristotle defined as a walking dream, a private wish that things might be otherwise.
So imagine. I don't know if people did or didn't hope in the times of the Greek gods. I mean, in the times when these human beings believed in the Greek gods. Judaism never had such a word for tragedy. Tragedy means something is outside of God's control, something is going wrong with the plan. That never existed. There was no such word in Hebrew. They had to borrow a word from ancient Greek. Tragedia. Menachem just wants to say good night. Oh, that's perfect timing, Menachem, because we're actually about to watch a video. There was no such word for tragedy, for chaos, for things going wrong against the plan. That doesn't exist. That doesn't exist in Jewish language. Why? Because it's inherently a pagan belief. There's a Greek god. He's at battle with another Greek god. Something goes wrong. And we end up with a tragedy, right? This video is such a powerful video. But before we do the video, no, you know what? Let's do the video first, and then we'll end off with an exercise, and then we'll call it a night. Please immediately stop me if you guys cannot hear the volume. I think you should be able to, but let me know if you cannot.
In 2010, a Jewish psychologist conducted a clinical study into the effects of a central pillar on Judaism's monotheistic belief, trust in God, on emotional well-being.
My name is David Rossmarin, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School in the Department of Psychiatry, and I'm also the founder and director of the Center for Anxiety, which has a private outpatient and intensive outpatient clinic.
Dr. Rossmarin prepared a Judaism-based treatment plan for patients suffering from anxiety and stress.
I created a program to help people build higher levels of trust in God. I hopped a plane to Israel, and I met with a number of rabbis from around the country. And I asked them that question. I said, how would you help a person build faith and trust in God? And they gave me concepts, but they also gave me exercises. One of the concepts of trust in God is a belief that God is intimately involved in every detail of a person's life. It's not just that God created the world and set it into motion and let it go. That would not be the Jewish belief of God, but rather trust in God entails believing that every breath, every movement, everything that happens, whether externally or internally, is ultimately in God's hands. One of the exercises involves thinking about God's involvement in day-to-day exercises. For example, standing up from one's chair. Can we picture that, yes, I'm choosing to stand, but God is enabling me to stand. God is helping my ligaments to stay intact. He's helping my muscles to move. He's helping my central nervous system to be able to coordinate the entire process. I'm not in control of any of that. My muscles, or my ligaments, or my central nervous system, or my blood, or my pulmonary system. All of that is out of my hands. I can choose to act, to try to stand up, but all I'm doing is trying to make a move. I'm not actually completing it. That is a godly matter.
To elevate the effectiveness of his program, Dr. Rossmarin selected 125 individuals suffering from elevated stress levels and divided them into 3 groups. One group received a standard clinical relaxation treatment, another received no treatment, and a third group engaged in the Trust in God program.
The question was, is that going to help people who worry and who have anxiety in order to overcome their levels of stress? We compared that in a randomized controlled trial, Trust in God training, to something called progressive muscle relaxation. That's also a way of being able to control one's anxiety. And we had a third group of people who received no treatment at all. And what we found was that the Trust in God condition, the people who completed that, they did substantially better, and the effects were actually very significant. In statistical terms, it was a 2 standard deviation decrease in anxiety and worry over only a 2-week period, which is very, very significant.
To the doctor's surprise, the remarkable results were long-lasting, with post-treatment follow-ups showing no weakening of the anxiety-reducing effects of the program many weeks later.
What we found is that higher levels of belief associated with greater reductions in depression over time. It really provided clear evidence that working on one's faith can reduce levels of anxiety and depression and make things better. Experimental, clinical evidence. When people don't have a sense of purpose, they don't think that they're going somewhere. It's almost like an existential crisis, like who am I and what am I doing here and what's the point of all this? It's an easy catalyst for depression. Faith can be it's probably the most common around the world way of establishing a sense of purpose. I'm doing this as a part of my godly mission. This is what I'm here to do. This was destined. Those are powerful ideas and messages that can have a massive impact on the way we think and the way we feel day to day.
Okay, so here is where we really begin to drive this point home. Not only is it clinically proven, but let's go back to that exercise that we did at the beginning of the lesson. You remember that exercise? The exercise was, how often do you think about God in a non-ritualistic fashion? Now, I'm not encouraging you to always be thinking about God in a non-ritualistic fashion. It's a very good idea to think of a God as a God that we serve, and therefore we shouldn't, eat non-kosher, and therefore we shouldn't miss a day of tefillin, and therefore we should keep Shabbos, and all the different things that that go into ritualistic service of God. But let's also remember that Judaism, or which that's the word we usually use for our monotheism, for the fact that we believe in God should also drive the way we walk around on a day-to-day basis in general, when you're stuck in traffic, and when you're I don't know, there's something wrong with the plumbing and therefore you can't take a shower this morning, whatever small nuisance in life it is, or whether it's a great calamity like coronavirus. If we are constantly reinforcing this point by understanding that God runs the world, that God created the world, and that he actually has a plan, if we are constantly enforcing that point, then no matter what comes, whether it's just extra traffic, me missing an appointment, or someone dying, or whether it's a global pandemic, those things should not shake my belief. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not here to say that this is a sign of Mashiach's coming. Maybe it is. I don't know. But I'm not here to say that. I'm not here to tell you I understand why 5,000 people died in Italy and whatever the number is in America. I'm not here to say any of that. I'm not here to say we understand things. I'm just here to say that if we want to understand how our faith impacts us in such a situation, it is exactly this point that we're walking away with today, which is, let's understand that there's a God who runs the world, who cares for me, and we should place our trust in him. He is recreating the world at every moment in exactly the way that it is today. He is recreating the world this second as he did last second, again with coronavirus, because he has a plan. Might not be my plan, but it never was my plan. All right, I was able to fool myself a little bit better in the past. Now I can't fool myself. So what's the big deal? And this leads us to our final exercise, which I'd like to leave you with. And I know we ran a little overtime, but that's fine. Exercise 2.3, right? Step 1, recall an experience you've had. We're in the textbook now. In which
I can't see it.
Sorry. Give me a thumbs up if you can see exercise 2.3.
Oh.
Okay, so I think it was Leah who said you can't see that, so it's something on your end. Recall an experience you had in which, after a period of doubt, things turned out unexpectedly well. All right? Let's say it was a business deal, whatever it is, or something you thought things were going to be not so great, and then boom, the whole thing turned around. Now, if you can, recall the feelings and thoughts you had before the unexpected good results, right? Stress, anxiety, somebody was sick, you weren't sure how it was going to turn out, what are the results going to be, the business deal might fall through, whatever it is. And then remember that there was a huge difference between the way, because this happens all the time. The things we don't like to think about those experiences because we're like, that was an exception to the rule. Something was going to go wrong and then it went right, and that must have been some fluke. No, remember that was because God had a plan in that situation. You were super stressed out, and God had a plan, and that's what happened. Right? Now try to apply that to something going on currently in your life. And by all of us, this can go on with the coronavirus. Think of a concern that you are presently facing, and how might the past experience that you just thought about, coupled with the teachings about trust that we just examined, be used to change your current feelings. In other words, how can we recognize that just like then I wasn't in control and things turned out better than I wanted to, maybe this time it's a longer, I don't see the plan. Maybe it's a larger plan. Maybe it's a smaller plan. Maybe it's a deeper plan. For whatever reason, this time I don't see it. That time, afterwards, I was perfectly happy with the results. Let's try to use that experience to shape our current one. Let's try to use what we understand about Hashem having a plan, creating the world every day with a plan to shape our current matziv, our current situation with everything that shakes our sense of control that we had over this world. So l'chaim, l'chaim. We're going to skip the end of the lesson. It's really not important for our conversation today about faith and trust. But thank you all for joining us for this conversation on faith and trust. And please join us tomorrow night. We don't have a class, but on Wednesday night we have Wine and Wisdom. This week is Parshat Vayikra, so we'll have a discussion about one of the verses from the Parsha of the week. Please bring a glass of wine with you. It is Wine and Wisdom. And thank you for joining us today. See you all Wednesday night, and then the Thursday night, Rabbi Hanoko will be giving a class on why bad things happen to good people. Please join us for each of those at their times. Exactly the same classroom, each of them at 7 o'clock. See you then. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Rabbi.
Off with one more point.
Thank you so much. Everybody. Baruch Hashem.
Class has been sponsored by Miss. Is she still here? By Mrs. Stephanie Fields. She was just here a second ago. Here we go. Stephanie, you wanna? We just stop the share. We're all done with that. All right, Stephanie, you want to share with us? Thank you very much for sponsoring this tonight's lesson. And any thoughts you want to share, particularly on this? You're muted. Hold on.
Just thank you very much for the enlightenment and look forward to your next lesson.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And we'll see you all Wednesday night or whenever you are here next. If you have any questions, please feel free to hang around. I can take a look at some of the comments on Facebook to see if there's any questions there. And please join us for the next class.
When is Rabbi Hanukkah gonna have a class too?
So, Thursday night at 7 o'clock. The topic is, why do bad things happen to good people?
Oh yeah, that was from the GLI class. Thanks so much, Zushi. May Hashem bless you richly and everybody.